"Security, keep an eye on that woman," the manager said quietly, but loud enough for half the showroom to hear. The words didn't sound like a request. They sounded like a verdict. The morning light spilled through the tall glass windows of Whitmore Fine Jewelry on Fifth Avenue, glinting off rows of diamond necklaces and sapphire rings arranged beneath warm white lights. Every display case sparkled with the kind of quiet luxury that whispered prices most people never asked out loud. The store smelled faintly of polished marble and expensive perfume, the kind of place where silence usually meant comfort. But at exactly 10:17 a.m., the silence in the showroom shifted. Not broken, charged. At the center of it stood Danielle Carter. She wore dark denim jeans, clean white sneakers, and a simple charcoal coat that fell just below her knees. No flashy designer logos. No diamond bracelets stacked up her wrist. No entourage trailing behind her like a shadow of status. Just a slim leather phone case in her hand and a calm expression that revealed absolutely nothing. Danielle stepped closer to the center display where the emerald diamond ring rested beneath a glass dome. The stone caught the morning light and scattered it across the counter in sharp green reflections. It was the kind of piece most people only saw in magazines. 1.8 carats of emerald-cut diamond set in platinum, surrounded by a halo of smaller stones that made the centerpiece glow like a tiny constellation. Price tag, $180,000. Danielle studied it quietly. Not the way someone gawks at luxury, the way someone evaluates it. Across the showroom floor, Brian Whitmore watched her with a tight expression. Brian was 42 years old, 6 feet tall, clean-shaven, and dressed in a navy suit tailored so precisely it looked stitched onto him. His name badge gleamed on his lapel, store manager. To most customers, Brian looked like the perfect image of professionalism. Polished voice, controlled smile. The kind of man who could describe a diamond cut with poetic detail while pouring champagne for clients spending 6 figures on engagement rings. But Brian Whitmore had already made up his mind about the woman standing near the emerald display. He leaned slightly toward the security desk and spoke again, his voice carrying across the quiet floor. "Just watch her." A young associate named Emily Ross stood behind the nearest counter, holding a velvet tray of diamond studs. She glanced from Brian to Danielle, uncertain. Emily was 26, new to the luxury retail world, and still learning the subtle rules that govern places like this. Rules that were never written down, but everyone somehow understood. Who looked like a buyer? Who didn't? Danielle didn't move. She simply leaned a little closer to the display case and pointed toward the ring. "I'd like to see that one," she said calmly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly through the showroom. Emily hesitated. "The emerald diamond?" Danielle nodded once. Before Emily could reach for the case key, Brian stepped forward. His shoes clicked against the marble floor with deliberate precision as he approached. Customers browsing a sapphire bracelet nearby paused, sensing the tension forming before anyone spoke another word. Brian stopped beside the display and folded his hands neatly in front of him. He gave Danielle a quick smile, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his tone measured and polite in the way luxury employees are trained to sound. "That ring starts at $180,000. He let the number hang in the air. Danielle looked at him for a moment, then back at the ring. "I know," she said simply. The answer seemed to irritate him more than surprise him. Brian tilted his head slightly, studying her again from head to toe. The jeans, the sneakers, the absence of jewelry. Everything about her appearance clashed with the image of the typical Whitmore client. He gave a soft laugh under his breath. Not quite loud enough to be called rude, just loud enough to be heard. "That piece costs more than most cars in this city," he said. A couple standing near the watch display exchanged glances. A man browsing cufflinks lifted his phone slightly, curiosity flickering across his face. Danielle didn't react to the remark. Instead, she turned her attention back to the display lights reflecting inside the glass case. For a moment, she seemed completely absorbed by the ring itself, as if the manager standing beside her didn't exist at all. Brian's smile tightened. "If you're looking for something more accessible," he continued, gesturing toward another section of the showroom, "we have several beautiful pieces starting around $5,000. Danielle finally turned her head toward him. Her expression remained calm, almost curious. "I didn't ask for something accessible," she said. "I asked to see that ring." The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Emily froze beside the counter, unsure whether to move or stay still. Brian held Danielle's gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then he chuckled softly and shook his head. People usually want to browse before looking at pieces like that, he said. Danielle's voice remained steady. Then consider this browsing. Another customer, Jason Miller, a tech consultant visiting New York from Seattle, slowly lifted his phone and tapped record. Something about the scene unfolding felt wrong, and he couldn't quite explain why. Brian noticed the movement from the corner of his eye. His patience thinned. "Ma'am," he said again, his voice dropping slightly. "This store serves serious buyers." The words landed like a quiet accusation. Danielle blinked once. Slowly, calmly, she rested her hand on the edge of the display case. "What exactly do you think I am?" she asked. Brian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly toward the security guard near the door and gave a subtle nod. Not a command, just a signal. The kind people in positions of authority use without speaking. Jason's phone camera shifted closer. A young woman near the necklace section whispered to her friend, "This feels uncomfortable." Emily finally stepped forward, trying to soften the moment. "Sir," she said carefully, "maybe we should just show her the piece." Brian didn't look at her. His eyes remained locked on Danielle. "We have procedures," he said flatly. Danielle's gaze drifted briefly across the showroom. She noticed the customers pretending not to stare, the quiet whispering, the subtle shift in the atmosphere. She had seen this look before. Many times. The assumption, the calculation, the quiet certainty that someone like her didn't belong in a room like this. Danielle exhaled slowly and reached into her coat pocket. Brian's posture stiffened slightly as she pulled out her phone. She glanced at the screen, tapped a contact, and lifted it to her ear. The call connected almost instantly. "Laura," Danielle said softly. The name meant nothing to Brian. But across the showroom floor, Jason Miller kept filming. Because something about the way Danielle stood there, calm, composed, completely unshaken, made the entire moment feel like the beginning of something much bigger than a simple argument over a diamond ring. Laura Evans did not ask questions. When Danielle Carter called, she never did. On the other end of the line, 30 floors above Midtown Manhattan, inside the quiet glass conference room of Carter Luxury Group headquarters, Laura glanced down at the caller identification and immediately straightened in her chair. Her voice came through the phone calm and efficient. "Good morning, Danielle." Danielle did not raise her voice. She did not sound angry either. If anything, her tone carried the kind of stillness that usually meant something important was about to happen. "Laura, I need you to check the internal monitoring feed for the Fifth Avenue showroom," Danielle said quietly. Across the showroom floor, Brian Whitmore folded his arms as he watched her. To him, the call looked like the move of someone trying to bluff their way out of an awkward situation. He had seen it before. Customers calling a spouse to move money around. People pretending they had financial backing that did not exist. The luxury retail world attracted that kind of theater every day. Brian waited patiently, certain the moment would collapse in his favor soon enough. Laura's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard in front of her. Within seconds, the secure corporate dashboard filled her screen. Every Carter jewelry location across the country appeared in neat rows with live operational feeds. Sales numbers, security cameras, staff activity logs. Laura selected the Fifth Avenue store. A small video window opened showing the polished marble showroom. She could see Brian standing near the center display. She could see Emily behind the counter. She could see Danielle herself standing calmly beside the emerald diamond case. Laura paused for a moment. Even though she worked with Danielle every day, the contrast always surprised her. In the office, Danielle Carter was known as one of the most formidable executives in the luxury retail industry. The woman who built Carter Luxury Group from a single boutique into a global jewelry brand valued at over $2 billion. But in that showroom, she looked like an ordinary customer. No designer suit, no diamond necklace, just quiet confidence. Laura leaned closer to the screen. "I see you," she said softly. Danielle kept her eyes on the ring beneath the glass. "What do you see happening?" Laura watched Brian for a moment. The manager stood rigid with authority, his expression already dismissive. The security guard near the door remained alert but uncertain. A few customers lingered nearby, pretending to browse while listening carefully. And then there was the man with the phone. Laura noticed him immediately. "Recording." Laura exhaled slowly. I see a manager making a decision he does not understand yet, she replied. Danielle's lips curved slightly at the corner. Not a smile exactly, just recognition. Brian shifted his weight impatiently. Ma'am, he said again, his voice tighter now. If you are not making a purchase, I am going to have to ask you to step aside so we can assist other clients. Danielle lowered the phone slightly from her ear, but did not end the call. Give me 30 seconds, she said quietly to Laura. Understood, Laura answered. Danielle slipped the phone back against her ear and waited. Brian glanced toward the security guard again. The guard took a few steps closer, but remained cautious. No one in the showroom was shouting. No one was arguing. Yet the tension spreading through the room felt almost physical, like a pressure building slowly behind glass. Jason Miller continued filming. The video frame captured Danielle's calm posture and Brian's growing irritation. He whispered to the woman beside him. Something about this feels important. She nodded without taking her eyes off the scene. Brian finally sighed. Look, he said, lowering his voice as if attempting diplomacy. These pieces require verification before handling. That is standard policy. Danielle nodded once. That sounds reasonable. The answer surprised him. For a moment Brian looked unsure how to respond. Danielle gently tapped the glass display case. So verify me. Brian blinked. Excuse me. You said verification, Danielle repeated. So verify me. Brian gave a short laugh, clearly amused now. Ma'am, verification usually involves confirming purchasing history or financial documentation. Danielle tilted her head slightly. Then you should probably check your system. Emily shifted nervously behind the counter. Sir, she whispered to Brian. We do have the client database. Maybe we should. Brian raised a hand, silencing her without looking back. The database is for established clients, he said. Danielle glanced briefly at Emily and then back to Brian. And what exactly qualifies someone as established? Brian did not answer that question. Instead, he gestured toward the door with professional firmness. I am trying to avoid an uncomfortable situation, he said. But I need to keep the showroom environment appropriate for our clientele. The words hung in the air. Appropriate. Danielle slowly lowered her phone again. Laura, she said softly into the receiver. Are you still watching? Laura's eyes remained fixed on the live feed. Yes. Do you see the emerald diamond display? I do. What is the item number? Laura checked the product log instantly. Item number 3781 Emerald Cut, Diamond 1.8 carats Platinum Halo Setting. Price $180,000. Several customers nearby turned their heads as Laura's voice carried faintly through the phone speaker. Brian frowned. How did she? He muttered under his breath. Danielle looked at him calmly. Now verify the account attached to that inventory, she said into the phone. Laura typed another command. The corporate system pulled up the ownership registry for the Fifth Avenue showroom. Danielle Carter appeared at the top of the file. Majority owner. Founder. Chief Executive Officer. Laura looked back at the video window where Brian Whitmore stood confidently in front of the woman who technically signed his paychecks. Laura almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Verification complete, Laura said quietly. Danielle nodded slightly. Brian's patience was finally gone. Ma'am, he said sharply. I am asking you one last time to move away from the display. Danielle lifted her eyes from the ring and met his gaze fully for the first time since the conversation began. The entire showroom seemed to hold its breath. Even the quiet hum of the air conditioning sounded louder suddenly. You keep saying this is about policy, Danielle said. Brian nodded. It is. Danielle slipped her phone into her coat pocket. Slowly, deliberately. Then she rested both hands lightly on the glass display case. Then let us follow your policy, she said. Brian crossed his arms again. Exactly. Danielle's voice remained calm. So run my name. Brian stared at her. What? Run my name through your system, Danielle repeated. Emily looked between them anxiously. Sir, that is easy to check, she said. Brian hesitated for the first time since the encounter began. The hesitation lasted only 2 seconds, but it was long enough for everyone in the room to notice. Jason's phone camera zoomed slightly closer. Danielle waited. She did not rush him. She did not argue. She simply stood there beside the emerald diamond ring as if time itself had slowed down. Finally, Brian shook his head. We do not run system checks for walk-in browsers, he said flatly. Danielle nodded once. That is interesting. She looked around the showroom again, taking in the customers who were no longer pretending to browse. The whispering. The phones quietly recording. The tension that had turned an ordinary Tuesday morning into something else entirely. Danielle returned her gaze to Brian Whitmore. And for the first time since she entered the store, her voice carried the faintest edge of steel. You might want to reconsider that policy. Brian Whitmore did not like the way Danielle Carter said that. The words were calm, almost gentle, but something underneath them shifted the atmosphere of the entire showroom. For the first time since the conversation began, the certainty in his posture wavered just slightly. Only a fraction. Only long enough for the people watching to notice. Brian adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket and gave a tight smile that looked more rehearsed than genuine. Our policies are very clear, he said carefully, and I am responsible for maintaining them. Danielle did not move away from the emerald diamond display. She simply looked at him with a quiet patience that seemed to stretch the moment longer than Brian expected. The emerald stone beneath the glass reflected the overhead lights in sharp green flashes that danced across the polished marble counter between them. The room had grown noticeably quieter. Conversations had stopped completely. Even the soft background music playing through the ceiling speakers seemed distant now. A woman near the necklace section leaned closer to her friend and whispered something that neither of them finished. Jason Miller continued holding his phone steady, capturing every second. The video frame showed Danielle standing with both hands lightly resting on the glass display case, her expression calm and composed. Across from her stood Brian Whitmore, the manager of the store, trying to keep control of a situation that no longer felt entirely within his control. Emily Ross stood behind the counter a few feet away, her fingers lightly gripping the edge of the velvet display tray she had been holding earlier. She glanced from Brian to Danielle and then back again, her uncertainty growing with every passing second. Brian finally exhaled slowly and shook his head as if ending the conversation. Ma'am, I believe we are finished here, he said. If you are not making a purchase, I need you to step away from the display so we can assist our other clients. Danielle tilted her head slightly, studying him with the same calm curiosity she had shown since she first walked through the door. You still have not run my name, she said quietly. Brian's jaw tightened. Because that is not how this works. Danielle nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the statement carefully. Then how does it work, she asked. Brian opened his mouth to respond, but hesitated for a moment. It was a small pause, but it lingered just long enough to shift the energy in the room again. Danielle watched him patiently. Let me understand, she continued gently. You told me verification is required before handling a piece like this. She tapped the glass lightly with one finger. I asked you to verify me, and now you are telling me that verification does not apply. Brian's voice grew firmer. Verification applies to established clients. Danielle raised one eyebrow slightly. And how does someone become established? Brian gestured vaguely toward the showroom. Purchase history. Danielle nodded again. So the only way to become an established client is to make a purchase first. Brian did not like the direction of the conversation. That is generally how retail works, he replied sharply. Danielle's expression remained calm, but something in her eyes shifted. Not anger, not frustration, something colder, something more precise. That is an interesting system, she said softly. A quiet murmur passed through the group of customers now standing nearby. Jason's phone camera captured Brian's expression tightening again as he realized that several people were listening closely now. Brian turned briefly toward Emily. Emily, please assist the other customers, he said. Emily hesitated. Sir, they seem to be watching. Brian lowered his voice, then encouraged them to continue shopping. But none of the customers moved. The woman near the necklace section crossed her arms thoughtfully. A man browsing watches leaned against the counter, clearly waiting to see what would happen next. Brian looked back at Danielle, his patience thinning. This conversation has gone on long enough, he said. I am going to ask you again to step away from the display. Danielle did not move. Instead, she slowly reached into her coat pocket again and removed her phone. Brian sighed loudly. Calling someone else is not going to change store policy. Danielle glanced at the phone screen briefly before speaking. No, she said calmly. But the system might. She tapped the screen once and lifted the phone again. Brian watched her carefully, suspicion replacing irritation now. Danielle spoke quietly into the phone. Laura, are you still connected? Laura Evans had not moved from the corporate dashboard since their previous conversation. The live video feed still filled her monitor, showing the Fifth Avenue showroom from 3 different camera angles. Laura had muted the office around her, ignoring the staff members moving through the headquarters hallway outside the glass conference room. Her focus remained entirely on the situation unfolding on the screen. "Yes, Danielle," she replied immediately. Danielle kept her voice low but clear enough for Brian to hear pieces of the conversation. "I want you to initiate internal access verification for the Fifth Avenue location," she said. Brian frowned slightly. The phrasing sounded unfamiliar. Corporate language. Not something typical customers said in a retail store. Danielle continued. "Manager access level and point of sale authorization." Laura's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. The Carter Luxury Group internal system opened the Fifth Avenue store control panel. Every employee login appeared in a vertical list beside the operational dashboard. Laura located the account labeled Brian Whitmore Store Manager. She paused before selecting it. "Ready," she said quietly. Danielle nodded slightly. "Stand by." Brian stepped closer to the display case, lowering his voice again. "I do not know who you think you are calling," he said, "but you are wasting both of our time." Danielle looked at him steadily. "That depends on how you measure time," she replied. Brian laughed softly. "You are not the first person to walk into a luxury store pretending to be someone important." Danielle did not react to the comment. Instead, she glanced briefly toward the emerald diamond ring beneath the glass. "Beautiful stone," she said almost to herself. Emily shifted her weight nervously. "It really is," she said quietly. Danielle looked at her and gave a small nod. "You have good taste." Emily blinked in surprise at the unexpected compliment. Brian, however, was no longer interested in conversation. He turned toward the security guard again and gave another small signal with his hand. The guard took a step closer but still hesitated, sensing the unusual tension in the room. Jason's phone camera zoomed in slightly as Brian turned back toward Danielle with a final expression of authority. "I am giving you one last opportunity to leave the display area," he said firmly. Danielle slowly lifted her eyes to meet his again. For the first time since the conversation began, the calm patience in her voice carried a sharper edge. "Brian," she said quietly. The sound of his name stopped him instantly. Brian blinked. "How do you know my name?" Danielle tilted her head slightly toward the badge pinned to his lapel. "It is right there." Brian instinctively glanced down at the badge and then back up at her. The room seemed even quieter now. Danielle's voice remained soft. "Now here is what is going to happen next." She paused for just a moment, letting the silence settle around them. Then she spoke again. "In about 15 seconds, the point of sale system behind that counter is going to receive an internal access command." Brian frowned deeply. "What are you talking about?" Danielle did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned her attention briefly to the nearest register behind Emily. The sleek touchscreen display glowed softly above the counter, waiting for the next transaction. Danielle's eyes returned to Brian. "And when it does," she said calmly, "you are finally going to run my name." The showroom clock above the rear display quietly clicked from 10:19 a.m. to 10:20 a.m., and in that small shift of time the atmosphere inside the Fifth Avenue store tightened even further. Brian Whitmore stood perfectly still in front of Danielle Carter, his arms folded with forced confidence, yet the certainty in his posture was not as solid as it had been 5 minutes earlier. Danielle had just finished explaining that within seconds the store system would receive an internal command, and although Brian told himself that this was impossible, the way she spoke about the store's operations sounded far too specific to be random guessing. The customers surrounding them sensed the same thing. The woman near the necklace counter leaned closer to her friend again and whispered that the calm woman in the charcoal coat did not look like someone bluffing. Jason Miller continued holding his phone steady, and the small red recording light reflected faintly in the glass display case that held the emerald diamond ring. Emily Ross stood behind the register with growing uncertainty, her eyes drifting repeatedly toward the sleek touchscreen point-of-sale system mounted on the counter. The screen glowed quietly, displaying the store's normal transaction interface. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just the standard system waiting for the next purchase. Brian cleared his throat and forced a short laugh that sounded louder than he intended in the quiet room. He gestured toward the register with casual confidence. "That system does not respond to random phone calls," he said. "It responds to corporate authorization." Danielle's eyes rested on him calmly. Exactly, she replied. Brian shook his head, determined to reassert control. And corporate authorization does not come from someone standing in the showroom pretending to be important. Danielle did not answer immediately. Instead, she glanced briefly toward the register behind Emily, the same way someone might look at a clock counting down the final seconds of a timer. The movement was subtle, but Emily noticed it. She looked down at the touchscreen instinctively. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. The interface remained unchanged. Brian noticed the glance and smiled in quiet triumph. I believe we are finished here, he said again, this time with more confidence. But before Danielle could respond, the register screen flickered once. The small change was so quick that at first Emily thought she had imagined it. Then the interface disappeared entirely. The display turned black for a brief moment before a new window appeared across the screen. White letters replaced the sales menu. Internal access verification in progress. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Brian saw the color drain from her face and turned sharply toward the counter. What happened? He asked. Emily pointed slowly at the screen without speaking. The customers closest to the counter leaned forward slightly. Jason Miller stepped closer as well, angling his phone so the camera could capture both the register and Brian's reaction at the same time. Brian walked to the counter quickly, irritation already rising in his voice. Emily, did you enter something? Emily shook her head immediately. No, sir. Brian stared at the screen as the message changed again. Access level review. The system paused for 2 seconds. Then another line appeared beneath it. Manager credential confirmation requested. Brian frowned deeply. This must be a network update, he said, though his voice no longer sounded as certain. Danielle remained beside the emerald diamond display, watching quietly as the events unfolded exactly as she had predicted. She did not move toward the counter. She did not hurry. She simply waited. Brian tapped the screen once, attempting to reopen the standard register interface. The touchscreen did not respond. Instead, another message appeared beneath the previous line. Authorization source verified. Emily whispered softly, almost to herself. That is not a network update. Brian turned toward her sharply. Then what is it? Emily did not answer. She simply stepped aside slightly so he could see the entire screen clearly. The white letters shifted again, and a new prompt filled the center of the display. Enter name for account verification. The word sat there quietly, waiting. Brian's expression hardened. This system does not run manual name checks from the register, he said. It is not designed for that. Danielle's voice carried across the showroom. Today it is. Brian turned slowly to face her again. For the first time since the encounter began, his confidence showed visible cracks. You did not do this, he said, though it sounded more like a question than an accusation. Danielle walked calmly toward the counter now, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. The customers instinctively stepped aside to give her space. Jason Miller's phone followed every step she took. Danielle stopped beside the register and looked down at the glowing screen. The prompt still waited for input. Enter name for account verification. She glanced at Brian briefly. You wanted to follow policy, she said. So run my name. Brian stared at the screen again. His mind moved quickly now, searching for a rational explanation. Corporate system updates did not suddenly request name verification from the register. Not without authorization. And certainly not during a random customer interaction. Yet the message was right there in front of him. Emily spoke quietly. Sir, the system will not move forward until a name is entered. Brian hesitated. The customers watched silently. Danielle waited patiently. Finally, Brian reached toward the keyboard built into the lower edge of the touchscreen terminal. His fingers hovered above the keys. Fine, he said quietly. What name? Danielle met his eyes calmly. Danielle Carter. Brian typed the name slowly. The letters appeared one by one across the screen. Danielleccarter. When he pressed enter, the system paused again. For a moment, the showroom was completely silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning overhead. Then the screen changed. Account found. Brian leaned closer to read the next line. As it appeared, account status verified. His stomach tightened. The message continued. Access level owner. Emily gasped softly. Brian stepped back from the counter as if the screen had suddenly become dangerous to touch. Danielle looked at the display calmly and then back at him. Verification complete, she said quietly. The words on the screen did not flicker. They did not hesitate. Access level owner remained steady in clean white letters against the dark background of the register display, and for a moment the entire showroom felt suspended in place. Brian Whitmore stared at the screen as if it might correct itself, as if the system might apologize for a mistake. It did not. Emily Ross slowly stepped back from the counter, her eyes moving from the glowing words to Danielle Carter's face. The shift in the room was immediate and unmistakable. What had been quiet tension turned into something heavier, something irreversible. Brian swallowed once before speaking. This has to be an error, he said, though the confidence in his voice had dissolved completely. Danielle remained calm beside the counter. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply looked at him with the same steady composure she had maintained since she first walked into the store. The system does not make errors like that, she said gently. Behind Brian, the screen changed again. Owner authentication confirmed. Primary account holder Danielle Carter. The name expanded across the display in bold lettering. Jason Miller's phone captured everything, including the exact second Brian's shoulders dropped. A low murmur rippled through the customers who had gathered closer. The woman near the necklace counter placed a hand over her mouth. The man browsing watches shook his head slowly, as if replaying the last 10 minutes in his mind. Brian looked at Danielle again, this time with something very different in his eyes. It was no longer irritation. It was realization. He began, then stopped. Danielle tilted her head slightly. Yes, she said quietly. The security guard near the door shifted his stance, suddenly unsure where to stand. The invisible hierarchy of the room had flipped in an instant. Brian stepped back from the register as though the counter no longer belonged to him. In a way, it never had. Emily's voice trembled slightly. You are the owner? Danielle looked at her kindly. Yes. The word was simple. No theatrics. No raised tone. Just truth. Brian tried to regain composure. He straightened his jacket and cleared his throat. If that is the case, he said, I was only following standard procedures. Danielle nodded once. You were following something, she replied. The customers listened carefully. Brian's face flushed faintly. We have to protect high-value inventory, he insisted. That is my responsibility. Danielle stepped a little closer to the counter, resting her hand lightly on the polished marble surface. And how exactly were you protecting it? She asked. Brian hesitated. By verifying serious buyers. Danielle's eyes remained steady on him. You refused to verify me. Brian opened his mouth to respond, but no explanation came out immediately. The silence stretched again. Danielle's voice stayed calm, almost instructional. You assumed I was not serious. Brian's jaw tightened. I did not assume anything. Danielle did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You told me that peace cost more than my car. The words echoed softly across the showroom. Brian looked down briefly. A few customers exchanged glances. Danielle continued, her tone controlled but firm. You suggested I should look at something more accessible. She paused just long enough for the memory of his exact phrasing to settle in the air. You asked me to step aside so you could assist real clients. The phrase real clients landed heavily. Brian inhaled slowly. That was not what I meant. Danielle met his gaze without blinking. Then what did you mean? He did not answer, because the truth was already visible in the way he had looked at her when she walked through the door. The system behind him chimed softly again, drawing everyone's attention back to the screen. A new message appeared. Manager access review in progress. Brian turned sharply. What is that? He demanded. Danielle slipped her phone from her pocket again and glanced at it briefly. Laura's voice came through the speaker, calm and efficient. Manager-level credentials are currently under audit. Brian stared at Danielle in disbelief. You cannot do that without notice. Danielle's expression remained composed. I can. Emily stepped slightly farther away from the counter, instinctively creating distance from Brian. The customers remained silent, watching the scene unfold in real time. The showroom that had felt so exclusive just minutes ago now felt like a courtroom without walls. Danielle spoke clearly, not just to Brian, but to everyone. Listening. Luxury is not about price tags, she said. It is about experience. She gestured lightly toward the emerald diamond display. Every customer who walks into this store deserves to be treated with dignity. Brian's voice dropped. I was doing my job. Danielle nodded. Yes, you were. The system chimed again. Manager access level suspended. Temporary lockout initiated. The words appeared one by one as if the store itself were responding to the shift in authority. Brian reached toward the screen instinctively, but the touchscreen did not respond to his touch. He tried his login code. The system rejected it immediately. Access denied. Brian's breath grew shallow. "This is unnecessary," he said. Danielle looked at him carefully. "Is it?" Brian glanced around at the customers, realizing that the entire exchange had witnesses. Not just the people physically present, but potentially thousands more through Jason's recording. Danielle's voice softened slightly, but the firmness remained. "You said you were protecting the brand," she said. "You were not protecting the brand. You were protecting your assumptions." The statement hung in the air like a verdict. Brian's composure fractured completely now. "I did not know who you were," he said. Danielle responded immediately. "That is exactly the point." Silence. Not awkward. Not chaotic. Just clear. The system chimed one final time. A new message filled the display. Authorization transferred to corporate. Danielle turned slightly toward Emily. "You have been professional," she said gently. Emily swallowed and nodded, relief visible on her face. Danielle then looked back at Brian Whitmore, the man who minutes earlier had instructed security to watch her. Her voice did not rise. It did not tremble. It simply carried across the marble floor with absolute certainty. "Effective immediately," she said. "Your position as store manager is terminated." The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. Brian stood motionless, the weight of the sentence settling onto him in full view of the showroom he had tried so hard to control. Danielle held his gaze steadily. "You did not lose your job because you were cautious," she continued. "You lost it because you decided who deserved respect before verifying the facts." No one spoke. The emerald diamond ring still shimmered beneath the glass, catching the morning light as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything in the room had changed. Danielle stepped away from the counter slowly, her posture relaxed. Once again, the power dynamic had shifted completely, and it had not required raised voices, dramatic gestures, or threats. Just truth, and a system that finally ran her name. Brian Whitmore did not argue. He did not protest again. He simply stood there behind the counter, staring at the point-of-sale screen that no longer recognized him. The authority he had worn so confidently only minutes ago seemed to evaporate in real time. The showroom, once arranged around his voice and his gestures, now revolved around Danielle Carter without her even raising her tone. The emerald diamond beneath the glass still caught the light, scattering green reflections across the marble surface, but the atmosphere around it had transformed completely. The customers who had gathered closer did not whisper anymore. They watched openly now, their expressions no longer uncertain but awakened. Jason Miller lowered his phone slightly, then lifted it again as if to make sure he did not miss anything that followed. Emily Ross stood quietly behind the counter, hands clasped in front of her, processing the reality of what had just happened. The security guard near the door shifted his weight and straightened instinctively, his posture no longer aligned with Brian, but subtly oriented toward Danielle. Brian finally spoke, his voice low and tight. "You are making this public." Danielle met his gaze calmly. "You made it public the moment you decided who belonged here." The words were not harsh. They were factual. That was what made them land harder. Brian swallowed and looked toward the customers briefly, then back at Danielle. "This could have been handled privately." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "It could have," she agreed, "if you had chosen differently at the beginning." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of reflection. Emily found her voice first. "Miss Carter," she said softly, the title coming naturally now. "I am sorry for how this started." Danielle turned toward her gently. "You hesitated," she said. "That matters." Emily's eyes glistened slightly, not from fear, but from relief. The system behind the counter chimed again, this time softer. "Corporate override complete. Temporary administrative control active." Danielle glanced briefly at the screen and then back to Brian. "Your employment file will reflect today accurately," she said evenly, "including the language you used." Brian's shoulders sagged further. "I did not use any offensive language." Danielle's voice remained steady. "You did not need to." That sentence settled heavily across the showroom. A woman near the watch display nodded slowly. A man near the entrance crossed his arms thoughtfully. They had heard every word. Danielle stepped slightly away from the counter, reclaiming space not with force, but with presence. Luxury is not measured in carats, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. It is measured in how people feel when they walk through those doors. She gestured subtly toward the glass entrance. You told security to watch me. Brian looked down. That is standard precaution. Danielle's expression did not change. You did not ask security to watch the gentleman browsing the platinum watches. She turned her head slightly toward the man who had been standing there earlier. He shifted awkwardly, realizing he had been part of the contrast. Danielle continued calmly. You did not question the couple looking at the sapphire necklace. The couple exchanged glances, understanding dawning across their faces. Danielle looked back at Brian. You looked at me, and you decided. There was no anger in her tone, just clarity. Brian opened his mouth again, searching for something that could justify his earlier confidence. Nothing came. The showroom felt larger now, not physically, but morally. The polished marble floors, the mirrored walls, the carefully positioned spotlights all seemed to reflect something new. Accountability. Danielle glanced toward Jason's phone briefly. You have been recording, she said calmly. Jason nodded, slightly nervous but resolute. Yes, ma'am. Danielle did not ask him to stop. She did not demand privacy. Instead, she said, then record this part clearly. The customers leaned in slightly. Even Brian lifted his eyes again. Danielle's voice remained smooth, steady, deliberate. No one should have to prove their worth before being treated with respect. The sentence lingered in the air like a signature line. Emily's posture straightened subtly, as if those words had reset something inside her as well. Danielle continued. If I had not owned this store, the outcome would have been different. The honesty of that statement echoed louder than any accusation. Brian's eyes flickered, understanding the implication fully. The customers understood too. Danielle's gaze softened just slightly. And that is the problem. She paused for a measured breath. Because dignity should not require ownership. The words did not need emphasis. The room felt their weight without it. Brian exhaled slowly, almost defeated. I thought I was protecting the brand. Danielle nodded once. The brand is built on trust, she replied. And trust cannot survive assumption. The system behind the counter beeped one final time, confirming that Brian's credentials were fully deactivated. His name disappeared from the management panel. Emily watched it happen, absorbing the permanence of it. Danielle turned slightly toward her. For now, you will oversee the showroom until corporate assigns interim leadership, she said gently. Emily blinked in surprise. Me? Danielle nodded. You hesitated when it mattered. That tells me you think. Emily swallowed and nodded, gratitude and responsibility settling into her posture simultaneously. The customers began to shift slightly, the tension dissolving into something closer to admiration. A woman near the entrance began to clap softly. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was respectful. Another customer joined. Then another. The applause remained controlled, not chaotic, but sincere. Danielle did not bask in it. She simply stood with quiet composure, acknowledging it with a small nod. Brian looked around at the people who only minutes earlier had watched him direct the room. Now they watched him differently. Not with fear. Not with authority. With consequence. Danielle stepped back toward the emerald diamond display one final time. She tapped the glass lightly. Please have this ring brought to my office later, she said to Emily. It deserves proper presentation. Emily nodded quickly. Yes, Miss Carter. Danielle then turned toward the entrance. The security guard instinctively stepped aside, holding the door open without being asked. As she walked past Brian, she paused briefly, not close enough to invade his space, but close enough that her voice would reach him clearly. You mistook silence for uncertainty, she said quietly. That was your final mistake. She did not wait for a response. She did not need one. Danielle Carter walked out of the showroom the same way she had entered. Calm, composed, unrushed. But the store she left behind was no longer the same store she had walked into. The marble floors still gleamed. The diamond displays still sparkled. Yet something deeper had shifted within those walls. Not because of a raised voice. Not because of a scene. But because in less than 15 minutes, assumption had met accountability. And accountability had won. The glass doors of the Fifth Avenue showroom closed softly behind Danielle Carter, sealing in the echo of applause and sealing out the weight of what had just happened. The late morning air outside felt cooler than she expected, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the steady rhythm of the city that never paused for personal revelations. She did not rush down the sidewalk. She did not check her reflection in the window. She simply walked with the same measured pace she had used when she entered the store, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. But inside her mind, the moment replayed in sharp detail. The words, the tone, the look Brian Whitmore had given her when she first approached the emerald diamond display. She had seen that look before. Years ago, the memory surfaced slowly, not with anger, but with clarity. She was 22 years old, standing in a small jewelry boutique in Charlotte, North Carolina. Back then, she wore a borrowed blazer for a job interview she hoped would change her life. She had stepped inside the boutique after the interview, not to buy anything, but to see what ambition looked like under bright lights. A salesman had approached her with the same tight smile, the same subtle distance in his voice. "Prices are listed on the tags," he had said without being asked. She remembered nodding politely. She remembered pretending not to notice that other customers were offered seats, refreshments, conversation. She remembered walking out of that boutique with something burning quietly in her chest. Not humiliation, determination. That day she had promised herself that one day she would build a place where no one felt measured before being welcomed. The memory faded as quickly as it had arrived, replaced by the present rhythm of Fifth Avenue. Danielle reached the corner and paused briefly before crossing the street. Her phone vibrated gently in her hand. Laura's name appeared on the screen. Danielle answered without breaking stride. "It is done," Laura said calmly. "Corporate documentation is complete. His credentials are permanently revoked." Danielle nodded slightly, even though Laura could not see her. "Thank you." Laura hesitated for a moment. "The video is spreading already." Danielle glanced up at the skyline. "I assumed it would. Do you want us to issue a statement?" Laura asked. Danielle considered the question carefully. She could already imagine the headlines, the discussions, the speculation, but she also understood something deeper. "No," she said finally. "Let the footage speak for itself." Laura's voice softened. "Are you all right?" Danielle allowed herself a small exhale. "I am not surprised," she replied. "That helps." The call ended, and the city noise filled the space around her again. A few pedestrians glanced at her as she waited at the crosswalk, unaware that the woman beside them had just shifted the culture of a flagship luxury showroom. Back inside the store, Emily Ross stood behind the counter, still processing everything that had unfolded in less than 20 minutes. The showroom felt different now. Not quieter, clearer. The customers who had witnessed the exchange lingered, some approaching the counter with thoughtful expressions. The woman who had started clapping earlier spoke first. "You handled that well," she said softly to Emily. Emily nodded. "She handled it," she replied. The man who had been browsing watches earlier stepped forward. "I have shopped here before," he said. "I never noticed how people were treated differently." Emily swallowed. "Sometimes you do not notice until you see it clearly." He nodded slowly, understanding settling in. The security guard near the entrance adjusted his posture again, now fully aware that his earlier alignment had been misplaced. He glanced toward the counter and then toward the door, as if recalibrating his own sense of responsibility. The point-of-sale screen had returned to normal operation, but Brian's name was gone from the management panel permanently. Emily looked at the blank space where his credentials once appeared and felt the weight of accountability settling across the room like sunlight. Back on the sidewalk, Danielle continued walking toward her corporate office a few blocks away. She did not replay the applause. She did not replay Brian's expression at the moment the screen displayed owner. Instead, she thought about the sentence she had spoken before leaving. Dignity should not require ownership. The words felt larger than the store itself, larger than the moment. They carried the weight of every quiet experience she had endured before success made her visible. A black car slowed near the curb beside her. Her driver stepped out quickly and opened the door. Danielle slid into the back seat without ceremony. The city passed outside the window in a blur of steel and glass. Her reflection in the tinted window looked the same as it had that morning. Calm, focused, controlled. But beneath that calm was something firmer now. Not satisfaction. Resolve. She pulled out her phone again and opened a secure internal message thread with the executive leadership team. Her fingers moved deliberately across the screen. Effective immediately, she typed, "All flagship locations will undergo a blind audit of client interaction protocols. No advance notice. Results reported directly to my office. She paused for a second before adding one more sentence. Respect is not optional. She pressed send. The message disappeared into the digital current that powered her company. Across the city, executives would soon read it and understand that the culture of the brand had just been redefined publicly. The car turned onto Park Avenue and slowed near the sleek glass building that housed Carter Luxury Group headquarters. Danielle stepped out and walked toward the entrance, her heels clicking softly against the polished sidewalk. Inside the lobby, employees greeted her with the same professionalism they always had, unaware that she had just reminded an entire showroom what leadership looked like. As the elevator doors closed and began ascending, Danielle allowed herself one final reflection. The emerald diamond ring still sat in its glass case, untouched but illuminated. It would be brought to her office later, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that value was never about the stone itself. It was about who was allowed to touch it. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor. Danielle stepped out, her stride steady. Danielle Carter settled into the leather chair behind her desk on the executive floor. The footage from the Fifth Avenue showroom had already traveled far beyond the marble walls where it began. Her phone vibrated steadily against the polished wood surface, notifications stacking faster than she could read them. The city skyline stretched wide outside her office windows, sunlight reflecting off glass towers. But inside the room the air felt focused and deliberate. She did not rush to respond. She watched. Across social media platforms, the clip replayed in loops. The moment Brian Whitmore told security to watch her. The moment he said the ring cost more than her car. The moment the register screen displayed owner. Comment sections filled with reactions, some shocked, some reflective, some uncomfortably honest. In the Fifth Avenue showroom, Emily Ross stood behind the counter answering cautious questions from customers who had stayed. The energy there had not returned to normal retail rhythm. It had evolved into conversation. Is she really the founder? One woman asked quietly. Emily nodded. Yes. She built the company from one store. The customer glanced around the polished showroom with new perspective. I never would have guessed. Emily responded gently. That was part of the problem. Back in the executive office, Laura Evans entered without knocking. She carried a tablet displaying live analytics. The clip has passed 3 million views in under 2 hours, she said calmly. Danielle did not look surprised. And the response? Laura scrolled briefly. 70% positive. Many people are sharing their own experiences in luxury stores. Some employees from other locations are commenting as well. Danielle leaned back slightly. Employees. Laura nodded. Frontline staff. Some are grateful. Others are nervous. Danielle stood and walked toward the window, her reflection faint against the skyline. Good, she said softly. Laura tilted her head. Good. Danielle turned slightly. If they are nervous, they are thinking. Thinking changes culture. Laura paused, studying her. There will be criticism too. Danielle nodded once. There always is. She returned to her desk and picked up her phone again. A message from an unknown number caught her attention. She opened it carefully. It was from a former employee of the Fifth Avenue store who had resigned 6 months earlier. I left because of how clients were profiled, the message read. Thank you for seeing what I could not change. Danielle read it. Twice. Not with pride. With confirmation. She typed a brief reply. Thank you for speaking up. Accountability is never too late. She set the phone down slowly. In the showroom, a delivery team arrived quietly to collect Brian Whitmore's personal belongings from the manager's office. The process was discreet. Professional. No spectacle. The security guard who had once shifted at Brian's subtle signal now stood respectfully near the entrance, greeting customers with renewed attentiveness. A woman entering the store hesitated slightly before stepping inside. Emily approached her with a warm but balanced tone. Welcome, she said. Please let me know how I can assist you. There was no judgment in her eyes. No assumption. The woman smiled, visibly relieved. The showroom lights reflected differently now, not because the bulbs had changed, but because the atmosphere had. Back at headquarters, Danielle convened a virtual meeting with regional directors across the country. Their faces appeared on the large wall monitor in her office, framed in small digital squares. Some looked uneasy, others thoughtful. You have all seen the footage, Danielle began calmly. No one interrupted. What happened this morning was not a public relations crisis. It was a cultural test. The silence on the screen deepened. She continued, her tone measured. And the system passed. A manager did not. One director shifted uncomfortably. Another nodded slowly. Danielle clasped her hands lightly on the desk. Effective immediately, every location will implement anonymous client experience reviews conducted without managerial awareness. I want unfiltered data. A director from Chicago spoke carefully. Are we expecting more incidents? Danielle met his gaze through the screen. We are expecting honesty. The meeting ended without applause, without dramatic declarations. Just clarity. Laura remained seated in the corner of the office, observing. You could have avoided the showroom entirely today, she said after the call concluded. Danielle gave a faint smile. And then I would never know how it felt. Laura understood immediately. Danielle had not entered the store as a spectacle. She had entered as a variable removed from her own authority. Stripped of title. Stripped of status. Measured purely by appearance. The test had revealed more than a single manager's bias. It had revealed the invisible cracks beneath polished marble floors. Later that afternoon, the emerald diamond ring arrived at her office in a black velvet case. Emily herself carried it upstairs under corporate escort. When she entered Danielle's office, she held the case with careful hands. I thought you might want to see it properly, Emily said softly. Danielle motioned for her to place it on the desk. The lid opened slowly, revealing the emerald stone glowing under the office lighting. It was as brilliant as it had been beneath the showroom glass. Perhaps more so. Danielle looked at it for a long moment before speaking. Do you know why this piece exists? She asked gently. Emily shook her head. Danielle continued. Because someone believed beauty should be accessible to those who value it. She paused. Not restricted by assumption. Emily nodded, absorbing the lesson more deeply than any employee handbook could have conveyed. Danielle closed the case gently. We will redesign the onboarding training program, she said. Client dignity will be the first module. Emily smiled faintly. I will make sure the team understands. As Emily left the office, Danielle returned to the window once more. The skyline had shifted into late afternoon hues, sunlight warming into gold. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Jason Miller, the man who had recorded the moment. He had sent a short note. I did not expect to witness something like that today. Thank you for not silencing it. Danielle read it carefully. She typed back a single sentence. Silence only protects the wrong lesson. She placed the phone down and allowed herself one steady breath. The world outside her office continued its relentless pace. Cars moved. Pedestrians crossed intersections. Businesses opened and closed. Yet inside her company, something subtle but permanent had changed. Not because a manager had been terminated. Not because a video had gone viral. But because a system had been forced to recognize its own blind spot. And recognition, when handled with clarity instead of defensiveness, becomes reform. Danielle Carter turned from the window and walked back to her desk, her movements calm and deliberate. She had not raised her voice that morning. She had not demanded applause. She had simply run her name. And in doing so, she had redefined what luxury meant under bright showroom lights. The next morning, the Fifth Avenue showroom opened at exactly 10 o'clock, but it did not feel like an ordinary opening. The marble floors were polished as always. The glass cases shimmered under carefully angled lighting. The emerald diamond ring had been returned to its central display, resting beneath the dome like a quiet witness. Yet the air carried something new. Not tension, awareness. Emily Ross stood behind the counter before the doors unlocked, reviewing the updated client interaction protocol Danielle had sent overnight. The first line was simple. Every guest is a client the moment they enter. No exceptions. Emily read it twice, then looked up at the glass entrance. Outside, the city was already alive. Inside headquarters, Danielle Carter sat at the head of the executive conference table as the senior leadership team gathered in person for the first time since the incident. No one mentioned it immediately. They did not need to. The room held the weight of it without words. Laura Evans placed a printed analytics report in front of Danielle. Engagement continues to rise, she said quietly. The conversation has expanded beyond retail. It is about access, perception, respect. Danielle folded her hands calmly. Then we respond with action, not commentary. A regional director leaned forward. Investors are asking whether we will issue a brand statement. Danielle looked directly at him. The brand statement was made in that showroom. Silence settled across the table. She continued, voice steady and precise. We will not spin this. We will strengthen the system. Back at the Fifth Avenue location, the first customers stepped through the doors. A middle-aged man in a construction jacket hesitated slightly as he entered, glancing around at the glittering displays. Emily approached him with an even smile. Good morning. Let me know if you would like to see anything up close. No measurement. No hesitation. The man relaxed visibly and nodded. I am just looking. Take your time, Emily replied. The security guard near the entrance maintained a neutral posture, attentive but unobtrusive. Across town, Brian Whitmore sat alone at a small kitchen table in his apartment, his suit jacket draped over the back of a chair. The silence in the room was heavier than the silence in the showroom had been. He replayed the moment the screen displayed owner over and over in his mind. Not because he questioned its accuracy, because he had never questioned himself before that second. In the executive conference room, Danielle stood and walked toward the large digital board mounted on the wall. We are implementing a blind review protocol at every location, she said. Secret evaluations, randomized identity, presentation, different age groups, different attire, different backgrounds. She turned slightly toward the team. We will measure how our staff treats people before knowing anything about their purchasing power. One executive asked carefully, and if we discover more cases like yesterday? Danielle's expression did not shift. Then we correct them. She paused, letting the weight of the answer settle. Not quietly, correctly. The meeting continued for over an hour, outlining new onboarding modules, mentorship rotations, and leadership retraining. But beneath the logistics was a deeper recalibration. A reminder that luxury did not protect a company from scrutiny. It invited it. Late that afternoon, Danielle returned briefly to the Fifth Avenue showroom without announcement. She entered alone, wearing the same understated style she had worn the previous day. This time, no one hesitated. Emily looked up and smiled immediately. Welcome back, she said. Danielle nodded. How has the morning been? Different, Emily answered honestly. Danielle walked slowly through the showroom, observing interactions quietly. A young couple stood near the diamond necklace display, dressed casually, speaking in low voices. An associate knelt slightly to bring a tray closer to their eye level. Danielle watched the exchange for a moment. The associate's tone was warm, measured, respectful. No assumption. Danielle felt something settle inside her. Not satisfaction. Alignment. She approached the emerald diamond display again, standing in the same spot where Brian had once told security to watch her. The glass reflected her image clearly now. Emily stepped beside her. Would you like to see it? She asked gently. Danielle considered the question. Then she nodded. Emily unlocked the case and lifted the ring carefully, placing it on a velvet pad. Under direct light, the emerald stone burned with quiet intensity. Danielle studied it without touching it. Do you know what this represents now? She asked softly. Emily glanced at the ring. A reminder. Danielle nodded. A standard. She looked around the showroom once more. Customers moved comfortably between displays. Conversations flowed without tension. The security guard greeted an elderly woman entering with the same tone he used for a man in a tailored suit. Small changes. Subtle shifts. But meaningful. Danielle finally picked up the ring and examined it in her palm. The weight was balanced. The craftsmanship precise. It was flawless. She handed it back to Emily gently. Keep it here, she said. Let it stay visible. Emily understood. The ring was no longer just a product. It was a symbol of a test the store had nearly failed. As Danielle prepared to leave, a woman approached her hesitantly. Excuse me, the woman said. Are you the founder? Danielle paused and nodded once. The woman swallowed lightly. I watched the video last night. I just wanted to say thank you. Danielle met her gaze. For what? The woman answered quietly. For proving that we do not have to look powerful to be respected. Danielle's expression softened slightly. Power is not in how we look, she replied. It is in how we respond. The woman smiled, eyes bright. Danielle walked toward the entrance again, sunlight spilling through the glass doors as they opened. The city noise rushed in briefly before the doors closed behind her. Inside the showroom, the marble floors still gleamed. The diamond displays still shimmered. But something invisible had shifted permanently. Outside, Danielle paused on the sidewalk for a moment and looked back at the storefront. Her reflection overlapped with the jewelry in the window. She saw the woman she had been at 22. She saw the leader she had become. And she understood that yesterday was not about humiliation or revenge. It was about calibration, about aligning a brand's promise with its behavior. Her phone vibrated softly with a new message from Laura. Chicago location reports increased positive feedback this morning. Danielle typed a brief response. Good. Keep measuring. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and walked forward into the rhythm of the city. She had not raised her voice. She had not needed to. In less than 20 minutes, a showroom learned that dignity cannot be filtered by appearance. And now, across every location bearing her name, that lesson would not fade quietly into polished marble and bright lights. It would remain clear and uncompromising, just like the emerald diamond resting beneath the glass. 3 weeks later, the Fifth Avenue showroom no longer felt like the site of an incident. It felt like the beginning of a recalibration. The marble floors still reflected the overhead lights in clean lines. The glass displays still shimmered with diamonds and emeralds and platinum bands arranged with surgical precision. But the energy inside the space carried something steadier now. Not caution, intention. Emily Ross stood near the entrance greeting guests with the kind of composure that comes from knowing exactly what standard she was upholding. She no longer glanced over her shoulder for managerial approval. She did not need to. The standard had been rewritten at the top, and everyone in the building understood it. Across the country, blind audits had already begun. In Miami, a consultant dressed in athletic wear entered a flagship location and requested to see a limited edition diamond bracelet. The associate responded with warmth and professionalism. In Chicago, a retired school teacher in a simple cotton sweater asked to view engagement rings. She was offered a seat and a glass of water before being shown options. The reports filtered back to headquarters in real time, numbers accompanied by notes. Danielle Carter reviewed each one carefully, not searching for failure, but confirming growth. Inside her Manhattan office, she stood beside the long conference table where senior leadership had gathered once again. This time the atmosphere was not tense. It was attentive. A digital dashboard projected onto the wall displayed client experience scores from every location. The blind evaluations are producing measurable improvement, Laura Evans said, tapping the screen lightly. Positive interaction metrics are up by 19%. Danielle nodded once. And the qualitative feedback? Laura scrolled. Customers are using words like welcomed, seen, respected. Danielle allowed herself a small breath. Those were the words that mattered. Not quarterly projections. Not viral statistics. Impact. Continue the rotation schedule, she said calmly. No location should assume they are not being observed. One executive leaned forward thoughtfully. The industry is watching us, he said. Competitors are issuing their own policy statements. Danielle met his gaze. Then let them compete in integrity. The meeting ended without applause, without dramatic gestures. Just alignment. Later that afternoon, Danielle returned once more to the Fifth Avenue showroom, not as a test, not as a surprise, but as a presence. She entered quietly. The door opened with a soft chime. A young man in a work uniform stood near the diamond watch display, examining a piece with careful focus. An associate knelt slightly to adjust the lighting angle so he could see it better. No hesitation. No assumptions. Danielle watched from a distance, her expression unreadable but steady. Emily approached her with a small smile. We have had steady traffic, she said softly. Different clients than usual. Danielle glanced around. That is the point. She walked slowly toward the emerald diamond display. Once more, the ring remained in its place beneath the glass dome, brilliant and untouched. It had become a silent marker of a moment that redefined the room. Danielle rested her fingers lightly on the edge of the display case, not to claim it, but to acknowledge it. A woman in her early 30s approached hesitantly. Are you Danielle Carter? She asked quietly. Danielle turned and nodded once. The woman smiled nervously. I came here because of the video, she admitted. I wanted to see if it felt different. Danielle studied her expression carefully. And does it? The woman looked around at the associates assisting guests, at the relaxed posture of security, at the absence of quiet judgment in the air. Yes, she said. It does. Danielle inclined her head slightly. Then the lesson held. The woman hesitated again. What made you come in that day? She asked softly. Danielle considered the question for a moment. To measure the distance between policy and reality, she replied. The answer was simple, precise. The woman nodded slowly, understanding that leadership was not about comfort. It was about calibration. As Danielle turned toward the entrance again, she paused near the security guard. He stood straighter now, not rigid, but aware. Good afternoon, he said respectfully. Danielle nodded in return. Good afternoon. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it carried more meaning than it would have weeks earlier. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm. Taxis moved in steady lines. Pedestrians crossed intersections without looking up. The storefront windows reflected sunlight across the sidewalk. Danielle stepped away from the building and allowed herself a brief glance back. The sign above the entrance bore her name in understated lettering. It no longer represented just a brand. It represented a standard tested and reinforced. That evening, she addressed her entire company through a live internal broadcast. Employees gathered in break rooms and stock rooms across the country to watch her on screen. Danielle stood against a simple backdrop in her office. No elaborate stage, no dramatic lighting. Just clarity. 3 weeks ago, she began calmly. A moment inside one of our stores reminded us that policy without practice is empty. The employees listened without movement. We corrected the error, she continued. But correction is not enough. Culture must be intentional. She paused briefly, letting the silence carry weight. Luxury is not defined by who can afford it. It is defined by how we treat those who enter seeking it. The sentence settled across thousands of listening rooms. Every person who walks through our doors deserves to be seen before they are measured, she finished. The broadcast ended without applause. Yet in showrooms across the country, associates straightened their posture slightly. Not from fear, from understanding. Later that night, Danielle stood once more at the window of her office overlooking Manhattan. The skyline shimmered under evening lights, buildings glowing like constellations against the dark sky. Her phone rested silent on the desk. No urgent notifications. No crisis alerts. Just stillness. She reflected on the young woman in Charlotte years ago who had stood inside a small boutique and felt invisible. She reflected on the manager who had mistaken composure for uncertainty. And she reflected on the emerald diamond ring still glowing beneath glass in a Fifth Avenue showroom. None of it had required shouting. None of it had required spectacle. Just presence. She turned away from the window and switched off the lights in her office. The room darkened, leaving only the faint glow of the city beyond the glass. In less than half an hour on an ordinary morning, a single decision had revealed the fault line between assumption and accountability. And in the weeks that followed, that fault line had been reinforced with intention. The marble floors still gleamed. The diamonds still sparkled. But now, beneath the surface, the standard was clear. Respect first. Always. And that standard did not require ownership to exist. It required leadership to enforce it. 6 months later, the Fifth Avenue showroom did not advertise what had happened within its marble walls, yet the memory of that morning lived quietly in the culture of the space. The emerald diamond still rested beneath its glass dome at the center display, but it no longer symbolized exclusivity alone. It symbolized evaluation. It symbolized a moment when assumption was challenged and corrected in real time. Emily Ross, now officially appointed general manager of the location, moved across the showroom floor with a confidence that had been earned, not assigned. Her posture reflected clarity rather than authority. Associates greeted guests with steady eye contact and balanced warmth, not exaggerated politeness reserved for certain appearances. The difference was subtle to the casual observer, but profound to anyone who had felt the weight of being measured. Before being welcomed, Danielle Carter entered the store again without announcement on a quiet Thursday afternoon. She wore the same understated style she had worn that first day, denim and a tailored coat. No visible diamonds, no visible symbols of power. This time, no one hesitated. An associate near the entrance smiled naturally. "Welcome," he said, not because he recognized her, because that was now the standard. Danielle paused near the emerald display, studying her reflection in the glass. The ring caught the light, scattering green brilliance across her hand as she rested it gently against the case. She remembered the exact spot where Brian Whitmore had stood, the exact tone in his voice when he had said the piece cost more than her car. She remembered the silence that followed the word owner on the register screen. But the memory no longer carried tension. It carried instruction. Emily approached quietly. "We completed the quarterly audit," she said. "Every location passed the blind evaluation." Danielle nodded once. "What did we learn?" Emily considered the question. "That awareness fades if it is not reinforced," she replied. "So we reinforced it." Danielle's gaze remained steady on the ring. "Good." Across the showroom, a teenage boy in a school hoodie stood near the watch display, studying a stainless steel timepiece with intense focus. An associate leaned slightly to bring the piece closer, explaining its craftsmanship without condescension. The boy listened carefully, absorbing every detail. His curiosity was met with respect. Danielle watched the exchange for a moment, then turned toward the entrance. The security guard opened the door for a woman in casual athletic wear carrying a gym bag. No hesitation. No second glance. The environment felt balanced. Not overly corrected. Just aligned. That evening, Danielle returned to headquarters for a scheduled board meeting. The directors gathered around the long table overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Financial reports were presented first, numbers rising steadily over the past 2 quarters. Brand engagement had increased. Customer retention had improved. Investors were satisfied. Yet Danielle did not focus on the charts. When her turn came to speak, she stood calmly. "Growth is not just revenue," she said. "It is integrity sustained under observation." The board members listened without interruption. "We were tested publicly," she continued, "and we chose accountability over defense." She paused briefly. "That decision is now part of our identity." No one challenged her. Because the data supported it. And because the footage that had once traveled across millions of screens had reshaped not only perception, but internal expectation. After the meeting, Danielle remained alone in the conference room for a few moments, looking out at the skyline. The city lights flickered on as evening settled over Manhattan. She reflected again on the young woman she had been at 22, standing in a boutique where she had felt invisible. She remembered the promise she had made to herself. Build something different. Not louder. Better. Her phone vibrated softly with a message from Laura Evans. "The Fifth Avenue location received a handwritten note today," it read. Danielle opened the attached image. The note was written in neat cursive. "I brought my daughter here after watching your story. She left believing she belonged anywhere she chooses to stand. Thank you." Danielle read the sentence slowly. She did not smile widely. She did not exhale dramatically. She simply closed her eyes for a second and allowed the weight of it to settle. That was the metric that mattered. Back at the showroom the following morning, the emerald diamond ring was removed briefly for a private viewing appointment. The client was a middle-aged school principal purchasing it as an anniversary gift. She examined the ring carefully, not with hesitation, but with thoughtful appreciation. Emily described its cut and clarity with professional detail, her tone even and respectful. The transaction was completed without spectacle, just service. When the ring was returned to its central display later that afternoon, it carried no visible sign of its journey. Yet everyone who worked beneath its light understood its significance. It was not the most expensive piece in the store. It was not the rarest, but it was the most instructive. Weeks turned into months. The blind audits continued. Associates rotated through empathy training sessions that included role-playing scenarios where appearance, age, or background could not influence service quality. Security staff underwent similar retraining, focusing on observation without bias. The culture did not transform overnight, but it did not revert either. It stabilized. One afternoon, Danielle walked through the showroom once more, unannounced as always. She paused near the entrance where a father and his young daughter stood admiring a simple silver bracelet in the display. The girl pressed her hand gently against the glass. An associate knelt to her level and described how the bracelet was crafted. The father listened with quiet pride. Danielle observed silently, then stepped back. No one recognized her immediately, and that was precisely how she preferred it. Because if the standard held when she was invisible, it was real. As she prepared to leave, Emily approached with a quiet question. "Do you think we will ever stop being tested?" Danielle looked around the showroom one final time before answering. "Leadership is a constant test," she said calmly. "The goal is not to avoid it. It is to pass it without knowing when it is happening." Emily nodded, understanding the depth of the statement. Danielle stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The glass doors closed behind her, reflecting both the jewelry within and the city beyond. She did not look back immediately. She allowed the sound of traffic and distant voices to fill the space around her. Then she turned slightly and studied the storefront once more. The name above the entrance did not feel heavier. It felt earned. She had walked in alone that morning months ago. No entourage, no announcement, just a quiet test. And when the system ran her name, it had revealed more than ownership. It had revealed responsibility. Now, every time someone stepped through those doors, they would be met first as a person, not as a projection. That was the reform. Not loud, not dramatic, permanent. Danielle adjusted her coat and walked forward into the rhythm of the city once again. She did not need applause. She did not need headlines. The emerald diamond would continue to glow beneath glass, a silent reminder that value is not proven by price. It is proven by principle. And principle, when enforced with calm authority, does not fade. 1 year later, the Fifth Avenue showroom no longer carried even a whisper of the tension that once lived beneath its lights. Yet the lesson from that morning had not faded. It had matured. The marble floors still reflected the glow of carefully positioned chandeliers. The glass cases still displayed diamonds and emeralds arranged with mathematical precision. The emerald-cut ring remained at the center, beneath its dome, brilliant and steady. But what had changed was not visible in stone or steel. It was visible in posture, in tone, in the pause before an assumption could form. Danielle Carter stood across the street from the storefront just before opening hours, watching through the tall glass windows as associates prepared for the day. She was not scheduled to be there. She preferred it that way. A leader does not always announce her presence. Sometimes she measures impact from a distance. Inside, Emily Ross reviewed the morning briefing with her team. Every guest is a client the moment they enter, she repeated, not because they had forgotten, but because repetition builds culture. The associates nodded. Not mechanically, intentionally. The security guard adjusted his jacket and positioned himself near the door with a balanced stance, alert but neutral. Danielle crossed the street slowly and stepped inside just as the doors unlocked. The chime sounded soft and familiar. An associate near the entrance greeted her without hesitation. Good morning. Welcome. No flicker of recognition. No calculation. Just welcome. Danielle inclined her head slightly and moved through the showroom. A young couple stood near the engagement ring display, dressed casually, whispering to each other. An associate listened carefully to their questions about clarity and cut, offering information without pressure. Near the watch section, a man in a paint-splattered jacket examined a stainless steel piece. The associate beside him explained its craftsmanship with the same tone used for clients purchasing limited editions. Danielle paused at the emerald diamond display once more. The ring glowed under its light, steady and unchanged. She saw not only its value, but its history. She remembered the exact second the register screen had displayed owner. She remembered the silence that followed. She remembered saying, "You mistook silence for uncertainty. That was your final mistake." She did not feel anger when she recalled it. She felt calibration. A system had been tested. A flaw had been exposed. And instead of hiding it, she corrected it in daylight. Emily approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "You came early," she said gently. Danielle nodded. "I wanted to observe before the rhythm sets in." Emily glanced around the showroom. "It feels different, does not it?" Danielle allowed a small smile. "It feels aligned." A mother entered with her teenage daughter, both dressed in simple weekend clothes. The daughter's eyes widened at the sparkle of the displays. An associate approached them with the same warmth offered to anyone else. "Let me know if you would like to see anything up close," she said. The daughter looked up at her mother, then back at the jewelry. "Can I try one on?" she asked shyly. "Of course," the associate replied, unlocking the case without hesitation. Danielle watched as the bracelet was placed gently on the girl's wrist. No assumptions, no guarded tone, just service. That was the measure, not the viral moment, not the headlines. The ordinary interaction that followed months later. Danielle stepped away from the display and walked slowly toward the entrance again. The security guard opened the door with a steady nod. "Have a good day," he said. She paused briefly before stepping outside. "You as well," she replied. The city noise rushed in as she crossed back onto the sidewalk. Traffic flowed. Pedestrians moved without awareness of the quiet reform behind the glass. She turned once more to look at the storefront. Her name rested above the door in understated lettering. It did not feel like a title. It felt like responsibility. Later that afternoon, Danielle addressed a new cohort of leadership trainees at headquarters. They gathered in a bright conference room overlooking the skyline, notebooks open, expressions attentive. She stood before them without slides, without scripts. Luxury is not insulation from scrutiny, she began calmly. It is exposure to expectation. The room was silent. You will be measured not by how you serve those who look powerful, she continued, but by how you serve those who appear ordinary. She paused, letting the words settle. Because the truth is, you do not know who is standing in front of you. A trainee raised a hand carefully. What if we make a mistake? Danielle met her gaze evenly. Then you correct it publicly and permanently. No hesitation. No deflection. Leadership is not the absence of error, she said. It is the refusal to protect it. The trainees wrote the sentence down quietly. That evening, Danielle returned to her office alone. The skyline shimmered beyond the glass. She removed her coat and set it across the back of her chair. On her desk rested the velvet case containing the emerald diamond ring. She opened it slowly and lifted the piece into her palm. The stone caught the office light, scattering green reflections across her hand. She did not wear it. She simply studied it. This ring had once been a test. Now it was a reminder. A reminder that authority means nothing if it is not exercised with clarity. She closed the case gently and returned it to its place. Her phone vibrated softly with a final report from Laura. Annual blind audit completed. All locations met or exceeded standard. Danielle read the line once, then set the phone down. She walked to the window and looked out across Manhattan. The city lights reflected in the glass, merging her silhouette with the skyline. She thought again of the young woman she had been at 22, standing in a boutique where she had been measured before being welcomed. She thought of the manager who had believed control was protection. She thought of the customers who had watched in silence before speaking up. And she understood something clearly. Justice does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with a login screen and a calm voice that says, "Run my name." She turned off the lights in her office and allowed the city to glow beyond the darkened room. In the end, she did not need a camera to prove who she was. She did not need applause to validate her authority. She became the proof. And inside a showroom on Fifth Avenue, beneath bright lights and polished marble, dignity no longer required ownership to exist. It simply required someone willing to stand still long enough for the truth to surface.